Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to Semaphore Uncut, a podcast for developers about building great products. In this new episode, Darko, the podcast host, welcomes Peter Zaitsev, founder at Percona and author. Peter sheds light on the complex terrain of open source, the evolving software development landscape, and the implications for developers and businesses alike. I hope you enjoyed this new episode. Now let's dive in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Zaitsev, and I'm a founder and until recently CEO of Percona, the company which helps people to be successful with open source databases. Besides Percona, in my entrepreneur journey, I have participated as a founder, investor, advisor in a number of other open source companies. And really, I am very much passionate about helping the open source founders, especially technical founders, to really be successful with open source based businesses.
We have recently launched a CI/CD learning tool which shortcuts into everything you need to know to level up your CI/CD process and increase your productivity. Also, to ensure that all our customers get the best CI/CD guidance, we have improved our sign-up process. From now on, everyone who's considering using Semaphore will get personalized CI/CD expert guidance from day one. Our engineers have more than 10 years of experience, so you'll surely be in good hands. Check it out on our website, semaphoreCI.com.
For folks that might don't know Percona like in detail, can you give us like an introduction on the company and what you guys focusing on, who are you helping, and so on?
At Percona, we started first as the company which was consulting in the MySQL space, especially helping people to run database successfully, get a top performance, high availability, and so on and so forth, right? Over time, we branched out. So now we also cover MongoDB and Postgres, and large chunk of our business would be as support to help people who need help running open source databases and also manage services. We also build a variety of open source software. We have our own, you can think about like a forks, right, extended versions of MySQL, MongoDB, and Postgres, which is focused as on adding the features enterprises need, right? Beefing up security, performance, and some other things while keeping things open source. And source available, right, for MongoDB to be specific. As well as we have solutions to run database on Kubernetes. We have monitoring software which optimizes management, right? Basically everything you need to run a database successfully.
Amazing. I'll just like also to add that you guys are a bootstrapped company, which is amazing. So congrats getting that far.
Yes, I think that has been interesting. I think relatively few companies in tech space, right, have been doing so and for so long and reach our scale.
How do you guys describe your ideal customer and who are you mainly working with?
Let me mention some history here, right? I think that is for also like important lesson in how markets change over time. Back in 2006, there was no like cloud databases, database as a service, right? Whatever. Like typically, if you needed a database, you had to set it up yourself. And a lot of our customers were those relatively small shops and have a lot of small customers, small deals, and obviously all of that changed. Now, I wouldn't even recommend a small business to go to us if you need just, small, highly available database. Why, right? I mean, you can go to Amazon, right? Or frankly, right now, database as a service become ubiquitous, right? You can get them from DigitalOcean, from Linode, right? Pretty much anywhere, right? For a few tens of dollars a month, right? And if you have a relatively small environment, right, then that is going to be good enough, right? But if you also think about that, there are a lot of very large environments out there. Right, we often speak about large databases, large fleets of service, right, and those companies typically have a special needs, right, and that is where gradually Percona customers have moved, right, and we cover some customers in the cloud because again, like if you are running, let's say 1,000 nodes, and even if you choose to run that on Amazon RDS, it will be very stupid for you to just scale by credit card. And scaling by credit card, that is a preferred way by the cloud vendors for you to scale, right? Because that helps their revenue, right? But at the same time, there is a lot of efficiency, right, which you can get. Now, there is also something interesting thing, if you look at the cloud space, is something called shared responsibility. Who is responsible for performance? Shared responsibility. Who is responsible for your security? It is shared responsibility, right? Well, and that is where you actually need an expert if you don't have an expert in-house. And that is where Percona also can bring it kind of level up. Right. Well, how can you go from that shared responsibility to extreme ownership? I don't want a partner, or many large companies don't want a partner to say, hey, you know what? Well, they're kind of fucked, but that's shared responsibility. They want to ensure, right? Somebody says, hey, we will make sure to go all the way needed, right, to prevent those problems from happening, right? And that is what Percona does. And this is another, I would think, interesting, maybe a lesson from me, kind of looking from a smaller companies to the larger companies, right? In a lot of smaller companies, you have often, I would say, like with technical problems, right? Or maybe that's not just like a technical problem, that's like a financial problem. Say, we don't have resources to do use that, right? In a lot of larger companies, problem becomes kind of organizational problems. Right? Hey, you know what? Well, we have no very technical problem exists. We may have resources to do that, but actually we have a lot of organizational politics and all the other crap which prevents us from achieving those, right? And that is also something which I think is very important in what we help organizations to deal with.
Thanks for sharing that level of insight. It actually very, very closely aligns also with our business. You start and then you serve a certain customer base at a certain point of time that allows you to grow into something bigger and essentially switch your target market. And in terms of other services that you provide, you guys at Percona now also have like a service where you are hosting database for other people. Have I grasped that correctly? Or
so what you have right now, right? You have a managed services, right, where we are responsible for databases, right, for other people, but we do that in a customer's environment. Right. And I think that is like one of the key differentiator, right, compared to, I would say, like many cloud vendors out there.
You mentioned that one of the things that you're focusing on, helping other technical founders, co-founders, achieve success in the entrepreneurial space. Has that always been part of, what you have been doing, or that's kind of as you and the company and everything matured that came?
Well, I think that came later. And I think that is also connects to my path, right? Because my background is I'm engineer, right? I has been working as engineer in MySQL AB before starting Percona, right? And I remember, some of us general ideas, right, we as engineers shared. Right. I remember thinking about, let's say, hey, you know what, if you have this, wonderful code we write, right, then they will come and, discover and love you, right, and that defines success, right? Or another thing I remember we had this idea about like a salespeople. Say, well, look at that. Those people, they do like absolutely nothing. It's us who write all the code, support the customers, right? And they do absolutely nothing. And then they get those, a lot of money paid, right? Like you may be thinking, right? But then as I transitioned to a business side, right? And then, had been growing business over a few years, right, and also networking with other entrepreneurs, right, to do that. You understand, well, a lot of those things, well, they're not exactly that. And I think for many technical co-founders, right, or technical founders, especially in the open source space, right, because I think open source kind of attracts a lot of kind of, idealistic people, right, or a lot of people who are kind of loners, right? I mean, like, hey, in open source space, you can just, go and write this stuff and only kind of, interact with people over, email, right, and never ever have to talk to anyone, right? For them, there is a lot of learning needed to see, hey, how can you take that the next step if you want your open source project to be actually successful, right? Not just used by a few folks, right? Or how to grow that maybe to a business. And that is what I was find what something I can be of unique help, because on one extent, I think I reasonably understand business by now, but at the same time, I understand them as well. I've kind of been there and kind of, like a part of me still kind of, would prefer I would be in that world where the best products always win, right? And yeah.
Potentially highly technical folks would find themselves better in B2B area than maybe in B2C. My experience is that in B2B sales process, there are kind of a lot of checkboxes that need to be ticked, and the process is more science-driven.
I think it is questionable. B2B sales, right? Especially if you go about, say, hey, that as like an enterprise sales, right? You have a lot of that. Hey, well, there is a contract and we don't like clause 17, right? Well, what about this and that, right? You get a lot of that, dumb, paperwork to deal with, right? You need to do kind of, negotiate, and especially at the larger enterprise scale, right? In this case. And I think there's also this mix, right? Because when you speak about B2B, right, you can think like, hey, B2B, which is based on their, like a product-based sales, right, especially initially, right, versus like a enterprise sales, right? I think a very good example is Atlassian, right, who has been, obviously B2B thing, right? If you just, at home, you don't need Atlassian, but they focused on selling through website to engineers, one by one and growing that. And I think only when they have been massive added the sales team in this case. And I think that is a path for a lot of technologists is a good one, right? Because I think for technologists, it's much easier to say, well, you know what, I can figure out how those new marketing platforms work, right? How do I set up, let's say, a sequence of emails to be sent, right? Rather than to say, well, now I have to get that message to figure out how to work with your purchasing departments and then make sure I can pacify that, compliance team and security team and large enterprise and so on and so forth.
We have recently launched a CI/CD learning tool which shortcuts into everything you need to know to level up your CI/CD process and increase your productivity. Also, to ensure that all our customers get the best CI/CD guidance, we have improved our sign-up process. From now on, everyone who's considering using Semaphore will get personalized CI/CD expert guidance from day one. Our engineers have more than 10 years of experience, so you'll surely be in good hands. Check it out on our website, semaphoreCI.com.
How do you see open source as a way to go-to-market strategy and so on? How do you that space and maybe the evolution in that space? Because it seems that it now became pretty drastically
Yes.
saturated to some extent, yeah.
Well, early on, of course, open source was what I would call like romantic open source. Hey, we all would go to open source space to change the world, make things better, right? In many cases, it was not really about money. As open source accumulated some successes, right? It's like, oh, wow, that is something you can, now raise money and go ahead and that can be valuable path where it's business first. The interesting thing about the open source, right, I think like a, problematic to a certain extent, right? It was initially, so open and so like anti-authoritarian, right? If you look, there was never open source trademark filed. So you know what? That means you can call anything open source. There is nobody can say, no, it's you are not really like a certified yada yada, right? Because nobody has like really ownership of that trademark. And that creates, I think, a problem. Even more so, I think we have an increasing idea of playing with words, right? We can say, on one extent, I want to have my proprietary software, especially like in a venture-funded space, so I can build a big moat about it, protect my IP, and all those kind of words you're going to be stating to your investors how they're going to make a lot of money. At the same time, as you kind of change, and when you tell your community and customers something like, oh, it is kind of open source, and you so get all the benefits of open source. And sometimes people don't even use the open source. Think about the Elastic. When we ditched open source license, we're calling that doubling down on open. Come on. Right? That is like a so stinking obvious way to attempt to mislead your community, right? In this case. Or you can talk about the cloud vendors who are just saying, hey, you know what? Our software is open source compatible. Oh, it is based on open source, right? Well, okay, wonderful, right? Like all what you are trying to do is to make people think it's something like open source, right? And I think I have a problem it connects. in this case, like, or development, right? Think about how their engineers, right? Or anyway, people involved in, software tech evolved. If you think about like 20 years ago, right, or something, well, you really had people who, were like really passionate about software engineering, growing through that. In many cases, you would have like a formal computer science degree, right, or math degree or something. These are people who really understand technology very deeply. Now, well, A, we need a lot of software engineers. B, we have a lot of simple tools, like languages like JavaScript, no code or low code frameworks, right? And many developers, they came into that ecosystem, right, from 2 weeks or 2 months, boot camps. They don't really have that sort of like a deep level of understanding, hey, what open source is, the licenses, dependencies, what is like a distribution, and so on and so forth, right? And they are actually more gullible. It is easier to trick them with that stuff. Oh, I heard open source is great. That means open source compatible is good. No, that's poison.
In that realm, I would like to continue. You mentioned big vendors, and you also mentioned people who just arrived into our industry. It can be even 2 or 3 years, but there is just so much of history which is missing. I mean, I remember late 90s and Microsoft, and they were like 100% against open source. And now, like in 2020, I think that there are many generations now of developers who have no context of Microsoft as an organization and the relationship to open source and all of that.
I would not think about Microsoft as this kind of romantic open source company who wants to make a world better through the open source software, right?
That was my point.
No, I mean, it is not that, right? I think if you look at this case, like there is a saying like, well, keep your friends close and enemies closer. How we can embrace the software, make it our own, kind of, make sure people don't embrace open source community at large, but they get into that open source-ish Microsoft walled garden. Right now, we often use the same words to call them. Right, you may have some people saying, "Oh, this is like a community open source versus, let's say, like a non-commercial open source." But very few people make that distinctions. While I think that is really, really important, right? And again, I'm hoping what we will get more of that, terminology and organizations. Those venture-funded, big vendor, commercial open source, they have a lot of money. They can buy a lot of influence. They can, sponsor a lot of stuff as long as you can play their tune, right? And then if you look at that like non-commercial open source, right, well, it doesn't have the same resources, right? And yes, so you can look at a lot of people being, seduced or at least conflicted about. Right? Especially as the people get older, often their priorities change. Money starts to play a more significant role in your life, right? And that is how people position also can be changing.
It seems that in the beginning, maybe 2010 or so, there were like many small software vendors spawning in that realm of SaaS services and all of that. And it feels that now that we are in the stage of like things just, melting together and becoming bigger. How do you see that? You are in the industry for 20 years or more. How do you see that cycle and where we are right now?
I think what is interesting in this case is also a lot of regional variety. In US, often you'll just say, hey, we just go over cloud, right, and wherever, right? And there is a lot of reasons about that, right? Because, like, for example, in the US, you have, like, engineers are very expensive. Trust to cloud is kind of high because those are US-based companies, right, and so on and so forth, right? Now, if you go to Europe, right, I see a lot more kind of conservative approach in many cases. Hey, you know what? Do we really want to trust completely to those kind of American clouds, which will have like a kill switch, right? And you know what? You never know who actually gets access to see our data. I think another thing in this case, I think what recently happened is in US especially, right? There is this very big focus on venture capital, right? Which was like, hey, get rich quick thing. Instead of working, for a decade, right, as, bootstrapping company takes, why don't you just, load up a lot of capital, deal with wherever, right? And if you're lucky, you will grow very quick, very fast. Well, most likely you will be forced to abandon your open source commitments in that time, because guess what? When you're taking venture capital, you are committing first and foremost for growth. That is how those VC companies are evaluated. Wherever they tell, right, we made the world better is not really how their portfolio is evaluated by pension funds, right, and wherever. Look, you don't provide us return, you're out, right? And being a, good citizen and making the world better, if you can achieve that as well, that's kind of good, right? We can put it on a website and say we only invest in a good companies, good funds, right? But you need returns first and foremost. And I think in Europe and some other countries, right, maybe people may not really be so addicted to that, get rich thin idea.
You mentioned that you are involved in other businesses, although Percona is your main business. Can you give us a glimpse of that and how we can find more about it?
There is a little company I started called Renegade Underdogs, right, through which I do some consulting advisory, right, for tech startups, right. If that's something you're interested in, you can look it up. I also, for years, involved in a number of other open source projects. One of the recent companies I helped to co-found is called FerretDB. We are building a fully open source alternative to MongoDB, which, as some of you may know, has a few years ago changed the license to non-open source. Another company involved in is called Altinity. It is building solutions for open source analytics. So, that is also a company you may want to look up if you are interested in that space.
Peter, thank you so much for your time. It was great talking to you.
Okay, well, thank you.
What a great conversation. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. Make sure to subscribe to Semaphore Uncut on your podcast player of choice so that you don't miss our new episodes. And stay tuned.